Hey there, in today's video we are going to go over the basics of changing colors for Amigurumi and some color work techniques so that you can create really beautiful color transitions and designs on your Amigurumi projects. This guy in particular is Onyx the Owl. I will have his pattern linked in the description box below if you want to check it out. But first, let's talk about how to actually change colors. I've got my sample started here, and I'm going to show you how to change colors. Now, you can technically change colors in any stitch that you want. Depending on the pattern you're following, this may or may not be indicated. If you're making stripes, generally you'll change colors in the final stitch of the round and then do the next round in the new color. But occasionally you'll be changing colors in the middle of a row to create a design. In order to change colors, we're going to yarn over or yarn under, depending on which technique you prefer. We're going to pull up a loop for our single crochet. Now, instead of finishing it by yarning over and pulling through, we're going to drop our old color and pick up the new color and pull that through to complete the stitch. And that technically works with any kind of stitch. So if you were going to do a half double crochet, you would complete the stitch up until right before the very last yarn over, pull through, switch colors like so. And that would be your color change. So this is the most common way to change colors. You can also do what's called half color changes, and that is the exact same process as what we just did, except we're going to add another step. So let's say we want to do a half color change in the next stitch. We're going to insert our hook. Now, instead of using the green, I'm going to drop it, pick the tan yarn back up, yarn under, pull up a loop. Now see, I've got two different colors on my hook. Now we're going to go back to the green. So I'm going to drop it. And this way the green loop stays on the top. So if we work this for a few more stitches, drop the green, pull up a loop in the tan, and then finish off with the green. You can see it creates the base of the stitch in tan, and then the top V shape is going to be in green. And if you're working stripes, this is actually a really good way to create a more seamless color change. I do have another video that goes more into detail about that, about creating seamless color changes in the round. We'll put that as an iCard on the screen. Yeah, so this is the half color change. One note though is, depending on your tension, it may kind of curve the piece in slightly because you're changing colors so often. But back to our regular color change. Now let's say we want to do an entire row in the green and then switch back to the tan. So there's a couple different methods of color work, and the first one that I'm going to talk about is tapestry crochet. And the way this one is different is that you're going to be carrying your unused color along the inside of the stitch as you work. So see how I'm holding this? I've got my left middle finger holding the yarn against the back of the work. And we're going to be working over the top of not only this yarn tail, but the unused color. Now I'm going to stop working over the top of the tail because it's kind of getting in my way. So I'm just going to keep working over the top of the tan. And if you look at the back side, you're going to see that we're not going to have any like loose, aside from this yarn tail, we're not going to have any loose strands back here. This is one of the easier ways to do color changes, because now if say you want to do a color change right here, all you do is start your single crochet, drop the green, pick up the tan, and then now you're going to hold the green against the back of the work and work over the top of it. And continue on from there. And you can change this as many times as you like. It keeps the back of your work very nice and neat, and it is one of the easier methods of color changing. So despite being easier, tapestry crochet does have a couple of downsides. Namely being, depending on the yarn and the tension and the colors that you're using, you may be able to see that unused strand of yarn through your stitches, which may or may not work depending on what your preferences are. So if you notice that you're doing this technique and you can clearly see the color of the unused yarn and it's bothering you, then you might want to use Fair Isle crochet, which I'll get into in just a second. Another issue is that the fact that because you're running a strand along the inside, this row of stitches is going to be thicker than the ones around it, or the ones that do not have a strand on the inside, which may cause a problem. Again, it depends on the yarn and the tension. If you are doing a lot of color changes in a project, you may notice that one side is going to be a little bit taller. It might affect your shaping. The stitches might jut out a little bit more. It just kind of depends. So keep an eye on that as you're working through a pattern. If you notice that because of the way you're doing the color work, your stitches are not letting things line up right, then change up the technique that you're using. So the second one, Fair Isle crochet, is basically the same, except we're not going to be running the unused yarn through the stitches anymore. So we're just going to do a couple of regular single crochet in the tan color. And now say I want to switch to the green. So I'm going to start my single crochet, and now I'm going to drop the tan, and I'm going to reach over and grab the green. And I'm keeping my tension fairly loose right now. And I'm going to pull up a loop to complete the stitch. And now we've got this strand of yarn here, and this is called a float. Now, when you're working amigurumi especially, you want to make sure that your floats are loose enough that they're not going to pucker your project and create weird like dimples. But if they're too loose, then your stitches will be really gappy. So one of my favorite ways to kind of combat this is to take floats very slowly. And so let's see, work a couple more stitches. Okay, so say I want to switch yarns again. Now I'm going to drop the green and pull the tan up, and keep your tension loose. And depending on how you hold your hook, this might be different, but kind of use one finger to hold the float in place at the back of the work while you yarn over and pull up a loop. And before you move on to your next stitch, you can tighten this up a little bit until, see, that's a little too tight, so I'm going to tug on it a little bit. Make sure everything isn't getting puckered. And then continue on. Now, if you're working a large project with long stretches of colors before you change, the longer your float gets, the harder it is to maintain that even tension. So, for instance, if I needed to work like 12 single crochet across, and then change colors over here. Here's what I would recommend doing instead. Work about half the number of stitches. Again, depending on the length, this might change, so you may need to break it up a little bit more. Okay, so let's say that's about half where we need to go. Now we're going to, I'm going to pull that float over here and just hold it against the back of the work and work over the top of it for one stitch, and then keep working. Okay, so now let's say we need to change colors in the next stitch. Now our float doesn't have to go nearly as far. So again, I'm going to gently hold it against the back of the work, complete my single crochet, and you see it's starting to pucker right here. Now this is where we're going to pull it until it's just loose enough that it's not going to affect the shape of the project. And then continue working. So that is how you do the Fair Isle crochet. And like I said, you can actually interchange these techniques depending on the project. Some amigurumi projects will specify saying, you know, specifically use tapestry crochet or Fair Isle. Others kind of leave it up to you on how you want to change colors. There's also a personal preference. I actually really like to use Fair Isle crochet because I don't mind doing floats. But if you don't like it and you have trouble with the tension, then tapestry crochet might be a lot easier. So that is the basics of how you're going to change colors for your amigurumi. And there is actually a third method of color work. However, it does not work for amigurumi in most cases. I actually have a pattern that uses it, but that is, it's the exception to the rule. And that one is intarsia crochet. I'll put a little picture up on the screen of an intarsia project that I worked a while ago. It basically means that you're changing colors, but you're using bobbins or separate skeins of yarn where you're going to be changing colors and then leaving that skein completely off to the side and changing to a new skein and continuing on like that. It doesn't really work in the round. I've tried. The one instance where it does work is a little bit complicated. That is in my Sammy the Turtle pattern. If you want to check it out, that pattern is free on my blog, and you do use that technique to create the rainbow shell. One last thing I want to talk to you about is stitch drift. Now, depending on if you're right-handed or left-handed, your stitches will naturally drift either to the right if you're right-handed or to the left if you're left-handed. You can see from the start of my magic ring right here, my stitches have drifted slightly to the right until we get to this starting point. Now that works with color work as well. Okay, so this was our first sample, and I reworked a couple of rows to kind of show you this is how the shift, this is what I'm talking about. So it's because I'm right-handed, the color work shifts to the right despite changing colors in the same place and working the same color on top of each other. You can see gradually as I keep going, the color work's going to shift this way. So to compensate for this, you would need to alternate per row. For example, having like this be tan and then the next one be green, tan, green. And then because it's going to drift this way on this side, if you wanted to have straight rows, you'd need to continually add one. In my patterns, I do compensate for this. However, based on your tension and the yarn you're using and all kinds of other factors, whether you're doing yarn under, yarn over, you may need to kind of troubleshoot that a little bit. But with that in mind, there is actually a way to get straighter color work. However, it does involve a little bit more work. So this is the same sample, but it looks a little different because from the very, very beginning, you start by doing front loop stitches only. So this entire thing is worked in the front loop. So I did front loop increases and increases until I got to the same amount of rounds as this sample. And now when I'm doing my color work, because we're working in the front loop, the stitches stack on top of each other much better. And this way you'll actually have straight rows on your color work, so you don't need to compensate in either direction. The downside to this is that depending on the pattern you're working on, it may affect how things connect. For example, if you're doing something no-sew and you have specific stitches where you would attach limbs or ears or something, changing this by doing front loop only might affect the placement, so you'd have to be aware of that. And then also it does end up with the shape being slightly different. This is a little bit more pointed towards the bottom than this one is, where it's a little bit flatter. And the texture of the stitches is slightly different. So you can't really do like regular single crochet and then switch to front loop, because your stitches are going to look very different. You would have to do the entire project in the front loop only. So that's just something to be aware of. But if you're kind of freehanding a project and you really want straight vertical rows, or you really want your color work to come out with nice like seamless lines, you can do front loop only. That will work. You just have to do it for the entire project. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and you found it informative. You can check out the blog post where I kind of go over some of this stuff in detail. That's going to be linked in the description box below. And if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you never miss another video from me. And I'll see you next time. Have a great day. Bye.